Today I want to talk all about React, from what a component is through building a fun application and deploying it. So first let's talk about what React is. So React is a JavaScript library that was built by Facebook in order to make building user interfaces more modular and reactive. The example that I like to give is, remember when Facebook moved from likes to reactions? Think about how many places on Facebook likes exist. If you were to be writing that website in just vanilla HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, you would have to update your code in so many different places, and that would introduce the possibility for a lot of bugs to come out of that update. React allows you to reuse user interface components. So instead of having to rewrite the code for that like button in your HTML every time that you want it to appear, you can instead use a React component where all of the functionality for that like button will be bundled all together. When you started web development, you might have learned about the separation of concerns, where you're supposed to put your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all in different files. React turns this on its head and allows you to write what looks and behaves like HTML in your JavaScript, and we'll call that JSX. Underneath the hood, it's really a JavaScript object. You can't write dry HTML or HTML that doesn't repeat itself. React allows you to essentially do that using JavaScript. Before you get started with React, I do recommend that you have some experience with the web development fundamentals, so HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. You don't need to be an expert in these, but it will really help you to learn and make it so that your experience is a little bit smoother. Today we're going to be using React hooks, which is the latest version of React. There have been a couple different versions over time, but we're going to use the latest and greatest today. Let's dive into some code. First, go ahead and make sure that you have Node installed on your computer. There's some instructions here for doing that. I'll also leave a link in the description. Node.js is going to be essential for create React app, which we're also going to use. Now, in the command line, go ahead and run npx create React app color switcher. And to break down this command, npx is going to allow us to run commands that we don't have installed on our computer. So create React app is going to scaffold a React project for us. We'll see what that does in a minute. And then this is going to be the name of our application. So I'm calling mine color switcher. If you were to create a different one, you would call it something else. This command will take a couple seconds to run. Now create React app is done running, and I'm going to go ahead and cd into the directory that it created. If you run an ls, you can see that it created a bunch of different files for us. Let's go ahead and look at what it did. First, we have the node modules. These are essentially other people's code that we're using within our project. Inside the public folder, I have a favicon.ico. This will show up in the tab of your browser. It's the little favorite icon that you see there. There's an index.html, and this is the file that our JavaScript code is going to attach onto. These are just some React logos. This manifest.json will allow you to make your application into a progressive web application, which would make it available offline and very performant, but we are not going to do that today. If you're interested, you can look into that. The robots.txt declares the rules for bots on our site. Inside the source directory, we've got a couple of different CSS files where our styles are going to go. Our app.js is where we're going to start writing our React code for this application. The test file is to write automated tests for a component if that's something that we want to do. We won't get into that in this video, but if you're interested in that in the future, leave a comment. The index.js is going to have some configuration for our React application. This logo.svg is just a React logo. The service worker.js is more configuration for that service worker if we wanted to create a progressive web application. We're not going to use it today though. And then the setup test.js is for configuring your testing setup if you're writing automated tests. The last few files are a git ignore, which will allow you to not track certain files within Git. Your package JSON holds a bunch of your project metadata, so the name of the project, the version it's on, its dependencies, and some scripts that we can run. Your README has a bunch of written information about your project, and then the yarn.lock has the exact versions of each node module that you're using. Yours might be a package lock.json instead, and that's perfectly fine. So I just talked about a bunch of different files that were generated by Create React App, but there's only a very, very few that we are going to actually use. First, let's dive into our index.js file. On the first line, we have import React from React. This is allowing us to import the React library. We need to do this in every file where you use this JSX syntax. And JSX syntax is where we write code that looks like HTML within our JavaScript. You can start to see that here on lines 8 through 10. Import React DOM from React DOM. This is going to allow us to use React specifically within the browser. There's also React Native for creating mobile applications, but we're not going to be doing that today. The import the index.css. This is going to load our index.css file into our application. The import app from app is going to allow us to use our app component within this file. And then the service worker, again, we do not need to worry about. On line 7, we are calling this method from React DOM render. And what this is doing is it's attaching our app component to our root element that's in our index.html file. So we can go into that. You can see right in here, there's this div with ID root. So this is attaching our React application onto our actual HTML document so that our React code shows up on our web page. This React strict mode is just going to give us more detailed error messages. Now, before we start writing code, let's go ahead and see what currently runs on our application. Let's go ahead and run npm run start to get our React server up and running. This should open up localhost 3000 in your browser, and right now it is a little atom that spins in some text, and that is coming from what's currently in this app.js file. We are rendering our React logo. There's CSS code in the app.css to make it spin. And then we also have this edit source app.js and save to reload and this learn React that is also showing up on the page. If I go ahead and delete all of this, I can return some other HTML instead. I can also delete this logo import because I'm no longer using that image. And now you can see that just hello world shows up on our web page. This code that looks like HTML that's returned from our JavaScript function is called JSX. This doesn't actually work in the browser by default. We need to use a tool called Babel to transpile our code and make it understandable to the browser. Create React App is running that for us underneath the hood, so we don't need to worry about installing that ourselves. Just worth knowing that if you write this JavaScript code right here, this function app with the return h1 hello world in a normal JavaScript file, you're going to get all sorts of errors. JSX is technically optional within React. However, you'll see most React developers use it because otherwise your code's going to be really verbose and not fun to write. We're going to go ahead and create this application where I can click on this red button and the background turns red, the blue button and the background turns blue, and the yellow button and the background turns yellow. So first we need to write our JSX code. First I'm going to create a div with the class name React root. We use class name instead of class within JSX code because class is already a thing in JavaScript. It's a thing that we use to implement object-oriented programming. So in order to make those names not conflict, we use class name instead within React and JSX. I'm going to create a div inside of that called centered so that I can center my content on the page. I'm also going to create a header to title my page and 3 buttons. I use Emmet to write all my HTML. I have too many typos if I don't. So if you notice me doing that, that is the tool that I am using to speed up my HTML development. Adding my class names onto each of these. And I'm going to run my formatter to change those double quotes to single quotes so that I'm consistent. And as I wrote that, you could see that my page updated with this markup. So I now have a red button, a blue button, and a yellow button displaying on my page. I also need to write my CSS code to style this, and I'm going to do so in my app.css. I'm going to clear out what's already in there. And I'm going to make it so that my HTML body root and React root are taking up the height and width of the page. I'm going to make it so that that center div is centered on the page. So now my text is centered, but I also am going to use Flexbox to center the whole element. So now it's centered on the page. Now I'm going to style my buttons. So now they're this light gray color with white text, which is not accessible, but we're going to color each one of these buttons separately. So if it has the class red, I'm going to add in background color red. And for that one, the text will be white. For the blue, we'll do background color blue, color white. And repeat for the yellow button. This one though, I'll make the color black to make it a little bit more legible. Amazing. Now our app looks how we want it to. We just need to add in the functionality. I'm going to go back to my JavaScript file, app.js. And what I want to have happen is I want to add the class red onto this external div if I click the red button. I want to add on the blue class if I click on the blue button, and same is true for that yellow button. Before we implement this, we need to talk about data within React. In order to implement this, we are going to use state. State is any data that changes over the course of our application running. We're also going to use React hooks for this. React hooks are the latest generation of React. When I started with React in 2015, we had to use create class because ES6 classes were not yet implemented. Then we used ES6 classes to implement React components with state. Finally, React hooks were introduced at the end of 2018. They're a relatively new feature, but they allow us to write less verbose code. And we can just write components using functions instead of needing to use classes or objects. Hooks are just functions that allow us to hook into React features. So we're going to use the useState hook. We're going to go ahead and import that. We're going to go ahead and use that useState hook at the top of our app component. Let's go ahead and console log what color is. It's an array with 2 items in it. The first item is undefined, and then the second one is a function. If I pass something different to useState, say yellow, then you can see that now the first item in that array is yellow, and then the second item is a function. So the first item in this array is the current value in state. So whatever color is set to at the moment. And then function is going to be a function that allows us to update state. So it's going to allow us to set this color variable to a different color. We'll use array destructuring to make it so that we store these 2 array items in different variables. Now you can see that yellow is our color and setColor is this function. We want to plug the color variable into this class name here. And we can do that by first telling React that we're writing JavaScript code, and we can do that by putting curly braces around this variable. So I can add this color variable to the React root, and whatever that color variable is set to will be included in this string. You could also use string interpolation here if you like that syntax more. So now the background of my application is yellow because I added the yellow onto this React root class. If I change my variable to red instead, now my background will be red. I'll initialize it as an empty string so that when my page loads, no color is loaded in yet. Now what we need to do is whenever we click on this button, change that color to red. In React, we can add event listeners directly to an element. So we'll say onClick equals, and then the curly braces to say that this is JavaScript code. I'm going to pass it a function, in this case an arrow function that calls the setColor function with red. So now if I click this red button, color becomes red and my background becomes red as well. We can also refresh our page and then look at the generated HTML code. Initially we have this div with class React root. When I click on the red button, then red gets added onto this class here. You can also use the React Dev tools to see how state changes. This is a Chrome extension that you can install. I'll link it down in the description. So now you can see that my state is set to red. If I changed it to yellow, then my background would turn to yellow. Okay, so we've implemented the red button. We're using that setColor function to change color to red. So it's going from empty string to red when I click on this button. I need to do the same thing for my other 2 buttons. So onClick, once the user clicks on that blue button, we'll set color to blue. Now if I click on that, my color turns to blue. Finally, we need to do the same for our yellow button. Now when you click each button, the background color changes. We can also look at what state is at various times if we go to those React Dev tools. So when the page loads, state is initialized as an empty string, and that's because we're passing an empty string to this useState function. When I click on one of these buttons, my state changes to reflect that. So now our app works as desired, but We could make this code a little bit less repetitive and a little bit more scalable by using components. So we're going to go ahead and create a second React component. So I will create a file colorChangeButton.js. And in here, I need to import React from React. This is so that I can use JSX within this file. And I'm going to create a function. I also need to export it at the end of the file, and this is going to make it so that I can import it into other files. From this function, I'm going to return a button. Now we actually need to use this color change button. I'm going to switch back to my app.js, and I'm going to import that component that I created. If I'm importing my own code, I need to use this / to say that I'm in the same directory, or use the relative path of the file. If instead I'm importing a node module, I'll just use the name of the module. We can create instances of that color change button using JSX syntax. Now you can see that I have this very light gray hi button that showed up on the page. We can create multiple of these, and they'll all show up. What we want to do is replace our 3 original buttons with 3 color change buttons. So we need to get their colors working and the set color functionality. Each one has a different color, so we need some way to differentiate between the colors for the different buttons. And what we can do is use props. Props are data that is passed from component to component in React. I'm going to add the color prop onto my color change button. These syntactically look like attributes in HTML. So now my first color change button has the prop red, the second one blue, and the third one yellow. Now, if I go back into my color change button, I can console log what those props are. I first need to pass them as an argument to the component though. So now if I open up my console, you'll see that in the first color change button, color is set to red, the second one it's blue, and then the first one yellow. And it's an object. So in order to get the color key, I would do props.color. So now instead of having hi show up on my button, I'm going to have my props.color. Again, I need these curly braces to say that this is JSX code. Otherwise, props.color literally will show up on the page. So I'll go back to this. And then I'm also going to add the class name of that props.color as well. And now each button is the appropriate color. Now we need to make our on-click event listener work. But we do have a problem. If we look back at our app.js, you can see that we needed to use the setColor function to update our colors. But that setColor function is in our app.js instead of our colorChangeButton.js. Luckily, we know how to pass data from one component to another using props. I went ahead and deleted my 3 original buttons as well because my 3 new ones will work soon enough. Now if I look at my props for each component, you can see that I have my color for each one, but I also have the set color function. So to use that set color function, I can do props.setColor. So on click equals a function props.setColor with my props.color. And now my app works like it did before. Now the only thing that we need to do is deploy our application. Right now our application is only local, and we need to get it deployed if we want to share it with anybody. I'm going to go ahead and create a new repository using the GitHub command line. It's really awesome. I just started using it. I'm going to go ahead and add, commit, and push my code to GitHub. I'm going to use AWS Amplify to deploy the code in my GitHub repository. I'm now at the AWS Management Console, and I'm going to search for AWS Amplify. I'm going to go ahead and click Connect App. Then choose GitHub and choose the repository that I just created. That will generate some build settings, which are what I need. So I'm going to click Next and then Save and Deploy. Now it may take a couple minutes for our application to build. Now you can see a URL that pops up under the picture of your application. You can go ahead and click on that and it's live. You can send this to anybody on the web. If you like this technical tutorial format, please leave a comment below with what you'd like to see next. Like the video so that more people can see it, and subscribe so that you can see my next one. See you next week.